Hello and welcome to Gendering Geopolitics, my short series where I have quick 10-minute conversations with women around the world. My name is Emily Prey and I'm a senior analyst at the New Lines Institute in Washington, D.C. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Sanam Naraghi Anderlini, the founder and CEO of the International Civil Society Action Network and the director of LSE's Center for Women, Peace and Security. Thank you so much for joining me today, Sanam.
Thank you very much for having me.
So we're going to be speaking about Afghanistan today, and there's a lot to get into. So just getting right in there, what will happen to the women and girls who weren't able to get on the flights out?
Well, first of all, that's half the population. And it is, on the one hand, let's say that what would we hope to happen? What we would hope to happen is that the Taliban keeps its promises in terms of what it said, allowing women to go back to work, allowing girls to go to school, giving amnesty, to people who've been in government and so forth. So that's what we would like to see. In reality, already we're seeing that they've told university students to go home, government workers to go home. There was something like 700 female journalists until about a month ago, until 3 weeks ago. Now there may be 100, if that many, left working. So the signs are already there. They said last week to women that they should stay home for their own security because their forces on the ground aren't sufficiently trained in dealing with women. So these are all just very strong indications and warning signs of what is to come and what is already happening on the ground. The other thing that we're hearing from multiple sources is that both in the provinces and elsewhere, they have identified houses where there are young unmarried women. There are young, unmarried young women. Many of them are also at risk of being basically forced into marriages, which is like the equivalent of sex slavery. These things are already on the. We're seeing indications and hearing about them.
So we know how critical it is to include women in peace talks and negotiations and in that whole process. How did the absence of women, or the huge absence of women in Doha, lead to the situation today?
Oh, I have absolutely no doubt that if Afghan women, peace builders, had been given the opportunity to enter the negotiation spaces throughout the last 20 years. So it's been 20 years that they've been struggling to get into the various spaces. But specifically with Doha since 2012, if we had had delegations of Afghan, independent of the government, of Afghan women peace builders from civil society and elsewhere present, we would not be where we are right now. And I say that for two reasons. One is that they were the ones that were raising issues of civilian protection, civic rights, human rights, the rights of minorities, the rights of women, of course, all these things. They were raising those things consistently over the years, talking about the importance of having a ceasefire before you give anything in. So they released, the Trump administration agreed for the Taliban to have 5,000 prisoners released. What did we get in response? And on what basis did that happen? Right? The Taliban was bombing clinics and schools, women's clinics, health clinics, and they were bombing them at the same time that they were sitting in Doha. So I have absolutely no doubt that if women had been present, a lot of these issues would have been part and parcel of conditionality and so forth. Secondly, and I think this is actually also equally important, it's that the humanity of what there's a missing piece of humanity in everything that's happened, right? It's been political elite bargains. Afghanistan has been talked about as if it's the theater of war. We're in the theater, we're out of the theater. It's a country, it's people, it's people's homes. The theater of war is your school and your home and your village and the street. And I don't think that this aspect of it was ever really, the humanity and the human experiences on the ground were ever taken seriously by those who sat at the tables. Maybe they're not on the ground. That's certainly what we see all the time, that often the negotiators are not necessarily the ones that are most tied to the communities. They have the least at risk. They're not, they're not hurting as much as the folks that are living on the ground, being targets of different forms of violence.
So for all of those, and there are plenty of them out there saying that the war has come to an end, what do you have to say about that?
Well, the slogan in Washington, D.C. was, let's end the forever war. A forever war. Well, first of all, we've had troops in Okinawa and in all sorts of other places, Korea, on the Korean border, for much longer than we've had in Afghanistan. But those of us who have fought for a very long time to end these wars have always, at least those in the women, peace, and security community, we've always said it's the decisions that are being made at the political level and the diplomacy that's taking place. And unfortunately, in the case of Afghanistan, this was an abject failure. The diplomacy that has been done around this, again, going across multiple administrations, always with Mr. Khalilzad at the center, but other diplomats that have been part and parcel of that sort of that community working on Afghanistan within the US and elsewhere. What has been between the diplomacy failing and then the way that the evacuation was done, we have unleashed, potentially we've unleashed war forever in that country. We've given weapons, we've left weapons for the Taliban and ISIS. God knows where these weapons are going. We left behind the biodata of anybody that was involved in the security forces or anybody that had any dealings with the US at any given point. All of that now is in the hands of, Taliban and their allies. Al-Qaeda is back. ISIS Khorasan is there. Now there's the opposition in Panjshir, and already it's being looked at as, India should support the Ahmad Shah Massoud's, the son who's now in Panjshir. So, what do we mean that we've ended the war? For whom have we ended the war? Certainly not the 38 million people. And by the way, those 38 million people, over 40% of them are children, and over 62% of them are under the age of 25. So what exactly have we done for them? And then the region, and then the implications more broadly, because extremist movements everywhere are now looking to the Taliban and saying, hey, well done.
That's exactly right. For whom have we ended the war? I think that's a really good question that a lot of people need to be asking themselves. Over the last several weeks, it was kind of crazy to see how veterans and volunteers, regular people, civil society organizations like your own, came together in this Herculean effort to get as many Afghans possible out of the country before the withdrawal date. What does it say that these powerful countries like the US and NATO allies who created the war left so much of the responsibility to regular citizens, basically, to clean up the huge disaster that they created?
It is, so we're going back to the previous question about, has the war ended? What we have unleashed is not only this force of extremism, which is transnational, right, on the Islamist side, but also in terms of white supremacy, in terms of Hindu nationalism. This weaponization of identity is something that we've now given huge life to, and it's very dangerous because it's across our countries and our societies. That's one thing. The other thing that we've done is we have totally discredited ourselves and our legitimacy in any of the discourse and internationally, or any of the leadership that we may have had left in the international space around human rights, human security, women's rights, responsibility to protect, atrocity prevention, conflict prevention, children's rights, all of it. How can we speak about believing in human rights and putting human rights at the center of our foreign policy when last week a British man and 200 of his cats and dogs got to leave the country, and Afghan nationals who are at risk, human rights defenders and others, women peace builders and others, as well as so many other people, were barred from entering the airport, or where some of them were even kicked out of the airport. So how can we talk about, literally, how can we even mention the word human when Afghan cats and dogs had preferential treatment?
I want to talk about the LGBTQ community in Afghanistan, because that's a group that really hasn't been getting any of attention, but are perhaps the most vulnerable or among the most vulnerable. So what happens to them now that the Taliban are in power?
These are really, really hard questions because the LGBT community was continued to be at risk there, right? In many countries there, that they are vulnerable for all sorts of reasons, because of social conservatism and so forth. But so they were already at risk. If they come out and they say, hey, we're a member of this community, they're at even more risk, right? And so there is, it's an incredibly difficult situation for them to be in. And as I'm saying this, one of the things, unfortunately, that I have to tell you is that we're also at a point where if you're a member of the police force, you can't come out and say I was a member of the police force. People are destroying their own identities, women especially women, because of the risks that we're putting them in. The LGBT community, the only thing that I know, and I don't know enough about how they're kind of organizing and helping to support people, but I do know that there is, like in our community of academia and peace building and so forth, that it's just basically private citizens and networks, LGBTQ networks around the world, who have mobilized to provide whatever support that they can. The most powerful countries and leaders of the world abrogated every responsibility to protect citizens and civilians, and especially, as I said, those who are really genuinely at risk because of their contribution to civic life in Afghanistan. And the reverse is also happening, that those of us who are genuinely the least powerful in terms of being able to move planes or open borders and provide safety for passage, we've taken on this responsibility. I started with a list of 120 people that were my network and my partners on the ground. Our list is now 700. And that doesn't include, as I say, all the police officers who also came through to us because somebody called me and said, nobody's thinking about these things. It's insane. And there's me and it's academics and NGOs. And as you say, the military volunteers and everybody doing this in their private capacity. And pockets of really dedicated, really caring civil servants and diplomats in different places. But it's not the leadership. Certainly not in this country.
It's incredibly disappointing, but it just makes it so much more important for organizations like your own, for the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for that. And thank you, Sanam, for coming on Gendering Geopolitics. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much for having me. And let's hope that whatever we're doing actually has impact, because the trying is not good enough.
Absolutely.
So, thank you very much.